So here we are in Siman Samech Aleph, and Yavni, take it away.
Great, thank you. Can people see clearly enough? Is the type big enough? Okay.
Maybe make it 125 or something more like that.
Is that good?
Definitely better, yeah.
Great. Oh, okay. So we're doing Siman Samech Aleph. It links pretty closely to the to what we did last week and the week before in Nun Hey, and so yeah, so I thought we'd start with the Shulchan Aruch, just the Shulchan Aruch, not the Rama, and then I'll mention like what parts of it we're gonna look at in depth and which parts we're not, and then we'll go back to the Mishnah and the Gemara and go forward from there into the Rishonim. Who would like to read? Joel, thanks.
Yeah, I'm off mute anyway, so why not? That makes me okay. I'm going to read it out of my Shulchan Aruch, so if there's differences, I apologize. But Kevan shechnisa ish arusato lechupa, af agav shelo nivala, harei hi kiishto lechol davar. All right. Vigova ikar ktuba v'tosefet im tit alman o tit garesh. Okay. So, right, even once whatever this chuppah thing is that we've, spent a lot of time last week trying to figure out, right, once he brings his, the woman with whom he's done kiddushin to the chuppah, right, even though they have not had a sexual relationship yet, right, she is his wife in all manners, right, and therefore if he dies or divorces her, she gets both the ketubah and any addition to the ketubah that might have been promised. Good. That's, yeah. Okay, keep going.
Yeah.
All right, b'midvarim amarim. All right, so what's the case though? Keshuriya levia, she has to be fit to actually have sex with him. Aval im hayta nida, but if she was nida, ve'achar kach knasa lechupa v'nitya cherima, ena ki ishto. El lechol dvarim hi adayin ke'arusa me'achar shehayta nida. All right, but if she's nida or maybe potentially some other reason that she wouldn't be fit to have sex with him, but we're talking about nida here in particular, right? Then even though he brought her to the chuppah afterwards, in other words, while she's still nida, right, and they had yichud, right, which we saw in the Rambam was a necessity, or was chuppah maybe even, right? Then it doesn't take effect. Nothing happened, right? And she's still in the same state of being an arusa and she's not become an isha at this point. So. Okay, and v'yeshomrim the dafka. So let me do the yeshomrim here. V'yeshomrim. Some people say the dafka linyan shelo tigba hatosefet hi adayin karusa. Aval lechol shar devrim harehi kinesua. But some people say, or there's one opinion, which is the Rosh, I believe. Yeah, the Rosh, that this is the fact that she's not like his wife in all manners. If she was not Ruya Labiyah and he brought her to chuppah, that's only in the case of collecting Tosefet Ketubah. And for everything else, she's no longer an Arusah. She's now his Isha. But in that one topic, in that one subject of collecting Tosefet Ketubah, that hasn't taken effect yet. So,
what do you have a svara for that?
We'll get to that. That's going to be that's what the issue was about.
Okay. I was being
Thank
the
you for the question.
Okay.
What's that? Yes.
I was being the straight man.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next time we shall say, glad you asked.
Glad. Okay. Thank you for the note. Thank you for the note. Glad you asked. That's exactly what we're getting to.
Glad you asked. We're getting to it soon.
So yeah, so if you remember in the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about what is chuppah, and part of the question of what is chuppah came up around this discussion of chuppah potential, like there's reason to think that chuppah might not work or might not be, maybe doesn't work, or maybe, doesn't have the same effect if we're in a situation where the chuppah is not raoya libiyah, particularly if one of the people is in nida. And so this is that in Nun Hey was a discussion of what is chuppah, and now we're getting to the question to get more deep into that question of like what impact does having the chuppah have? And so what we're going to look at, and so we're going to focus on this question of the Yesh Omrim versus the main opinion, which is basically the Rambam's opinion, versus the Yesh Omrim, which, as Joel pointed out, comes from the Rosh, of whether it is whether nida prevents the chuppah for the nisuin from taking effect for all consequences of the chuppah, which, if you remember, include a wife of a kohen eating truma, and the groom inheriting from the wife, or if it's more specifically limited to the issue of whether of the particular case of where something happens to the marriage in between the chuppah and bi'ah, if the chuppah had if the chuppah had was in a state of nidat, is the tosefet to the ketubah that the man wrote applicable? Questions on that before we go back to the sources? Great. So let's rewind to the Mishnah that gives background for this.
I do have a question. I do have a question that maybe I don't know. My question is, what's the tikkun? What's the eitzah to deal with this? If or we're not going to get to that.
That's a good question. I think we might if we don't get to it, can you raise it at the end? I think that might even be in the, anyway, great. Who would like to read the Mishnah and the Gemara? Or should I just ask someone? Ruben, could you do it?
1 second, I have like a million
sorry.
things open on my computer, but 1 second and I'll do it. Perfect. If my computer decides to work. Okay, perfect. Okay. אף על פי שאמרו בתולה גובה 200 באלמן המנה, אם רצה להוסיף, אפילו מהמנה יוסיף. Do you want me to translate, or that's pretty
Sure,
straightforward
yeah.
so far?
I'm going to translate as you go.
Even though we said that a tula is given 200 and mana is given 1, if he wants to add to that amount, if he wants to add even 100 of it, he could add as much as he wants. So in the case where she became a widow or she got divorced, whether she has the status of someone that's engaged or the status of someone that's married, she gets everything. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Mina Nisuim gova et hakol. If she's married, she takes everything. Mina Erusim, if she's only engaged, Betula gova 200 v'almana 100. The Betula gets 100 and the Almana gets 1. Because he only wrote it under the condition that she was eventually going to be his wife.
Right. So we see two opinions. One opinion, this whole question that we're asking doesn't apply. It says no matter when the marriage is terminated, whether it's from the betrothal or from after the nisuin, the woman gets both the mandated ketubah and the additional amount, but it's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's opinion that wins out, which is that you only get the tosefet. She only gets the tosefet if it's from the if it's after the nisuin has happened, whereas between the kiddushin and the nisuin, if the marriage is terminated, then she gets the mandated amount, but not any additional amount that was written into the ketubah. And the reason is that the ketubah was written is like an additional thing from the addition to the ketubah, which was written on the impulse of the man, is presumed to be written with the intention of actually having the marriage, not just the betrothal. Okay, do you want to keep going into the Pavli?
So let's say we're talking about a case where she went under the chuppah, but she didn't have any sexual intercourse. So what's the case? The question is, chiba chuppah koneh or chiba bi'ah koneh? Do we say that the affection of the chuppah is koneh, or is it like the affection of the sexual intercourse that creates this kind of like kinyan?
discussion of this question, and then this next question, this second question comes in, which I left out. Yeah.
בערב השני נכנסה לחופה ופרסה נידה, תמה. So assuming that she went under the chuppah and found out that she was nida, what's going on? What's the losing the word? But you get what I'm saying. If you want to say that the affection of the chuppah is kone, chuppah de chazi libia is chuppah where you have like potential for sexual intercourse afterwards. Aval chuppah de lo chazi libia lo, but you might say that what? That a chuppah that doesn't have the potential for sexual intercourse afterwards is not kone, or maybe doesn't have anything to do with one another, or maybe maybe it doesn't make a difference. And the Gemara ends up saying, like, we don't know. Like, it remains an open question.
Right. Thank you. So do people see that we've asked one question about whether it's the chuppah itself or whether it's the bi'ah that affects the irusin? And then we've asked a second question, well, what if she goes into the chuppah and she's in nida? Maybe that's the same as the first question, but they say, no, it's not the same as the first question. Even if you say that it's the desire for the chuppah itself and not the biyah that affects the erusin, we could still say that maybe it's only for a chuppah that is suitable for biyah, whereas as opposed to a chuppah that's not suitable for biyah, that's not considered a chuppah that does the erusin. Or we can say no, it doesn't matter. And so those are the two opinions. Yeah, Sarah.
I just want to flag the way that, right, like this is a little bit of a nitpick point, but the way you like restated the first question as is the chuppah the thing that effectuates the kinyan or the bia that effectuates the kinyan? It's actually neither. It's like it's turned into something emotional or psychological which is not something you see. I mean, we've seen up to this point, right? So I think it's just kind of. It's interesting that we've not only have we, right, when you phrase this question, it's about like his psychological, emotional posture towards her, much less than just asking like, you know, what we saw, I don't know, 5-6 weeks ago of just like who is chuppah kona or on its own.
Yeah.
Like this is a different way of talking about it. And anyway, I don't know, it just seemed like worth noting that it's different and like maybe thinking a little more about what's at stake in that phrasing of the question.
I mean, I think that also relates to the machloket that we see about whether this Gemara is talking specifically about the Tosefet or about like kinyan begadol, right? That like, if it's kinyan begadol, then that's like a really big shift, as you noted, from like how we've been conceiving of this. Alternately, we could see that as like the difference in that language of support for the view that this is Dafka talking about the Tosefet, right? Like the bit that's going beyond the bounds of what's expected, maybe that is connected to some level of like chiba, of like affection or desire, interest, so that like something beyond the kinyan is connected to that. But maybe the kinyan itself isn't necessarily talui on that.
Right, thanks. Wait, I actually wanted to go back to Sarah's point. Sarah, I thought there was a really important point. Thank you for bringing it in. Do you have reason from the text to say that it's Davka his emotional state as opposed to both of them together, or just because the Gemara is always talking about the man?
No, I was doing it based on some of the later sources, which then think about it and like talk about whether, you know, if he knows that she's in nida, then does it work, right? Like, does he have the same kind of chiba or not? Which seems like it's about his mental state. Right. But maybe that is saying more about who the authors are than what the situation is. But that was my reason for thinking that.
Yeah.
Certainly, like, I'm all for trying to read it as, you know, all parties having
but
like,
also
emotional lives. To Lexi's point, I think it's interesting. I think that like makes a lot of sense as a reading. I'm just wondering whether like the language of kona, I was not reading that as like kona the Tosefet. Right?
Well, that's
I mean, maybe that's what it is.
Well, I think it is a really good
but
point.
That seems a little bit strange.
And I think it's going to be an important part of the Rosh's argument. And the reason to think that is because the Tosefet is the only thing we're actually debating here, according to the Mishnah, right? So regardless, from the moment of Kiddushin, if the marriage is terminated, then the Betula Gova Ma'atayim Ve'almana Maneh, which was, right, the Mishnah starts out, yeah? Whereas, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It looked like Rafael wants to say something.
Only to complete like the point, your point, Sarah, like the data Rambam, b'pshat, like the simplest thing to understand here is the chibat chupa kona is not like a psychological thing completely. The question here is what is actually happening in the chuppah, meaning the Rambam would say someone that like he's getting married. The question is he like going to the long shot, maybe meaning he wants a married life. Yeah, so only chibat bi'akone, only like real marriage, like marriage that is possible to be applicable in any real sense, would make the kinyan of the chuppah. It's not like a chibat chuppah, like we're I'm so happy to be with you here, so let's get married. Like the effect of the marriage, chibat chuppah, is like chibat bia is like saying that like what he is intending on this act is having a marital relationships with her, not only as a like a point on the timeline, but like as a life. That's how I understand the Data Rambam.
I'm not sure I follow what your machloket is on Sarah's point.
No, it's not machloket. Like, but like Sarah stated like that this is a different view from what we saw till now about how chuppah koine, and I think that basically the Data Rambam, this Gemara is entering inside the basic psychology of what actually chuppah is. Chuppah is bringing someone to your house. And
you're saying that we have been talking about it as psychological.
Exactly.
I think you could definitely read the discussion we've had until now as psychological. Certainly in Kiddushi, yeah. Do you want to say something, sir?
No.
Yeah, just like right. I don't remember when like however many weeks ago, right? But like once we're talking about like Sof bia kona or tchilat bia kona, and like exactly like anatomically what that means, that's very different than saying this is about like what's going on in his head, as opposed to saying like, you know, you need this much penetration. Like that's really different. So I take your point that like we've always been to some extent been interested in something psychological, but it seems like the way that the question is asked assumes that we're in the realm of a psychological question. Then it's just like which like how far along does the psychology have to go, right. Which is a different set of like, that's a different, once you're asking that question, you're already in the like world of thinking about it that way.
Great. I'm gonna skip, we've seen this Rambam and the Rif. So the Rambam and the Rif we know are coming, where do they come down on the side of the debate from the Gemara? As we've seen, the Teiko, they rule, anyone?
They say that if she was in Nida, she doesn't get the Tosefet.
Right.
Well, actually, not only not the Tosefet, at least the Rambam thinks that she isn't like Niknet Doraita for anything, including like Lita Mela or Yorsha or stuff like that.
Right. Yes. So Chuppah, right. So Chuppah has to be Chazia Lebia. Great. And the Rif also rules according to that opinion, like states that it's a safek and says that therefore that's the rule. We'll see them quoted, but I'm going to skip them inside. And would someone like to take on the Rosh, which is a bigger, or should I pick someone? I know I see who's in. Aaron, should I take it or not?
I'm happy to, if someone, unless anybody has a strong desire to do it, a strong chiba.
So I'm going to skip you down to where I've grayed out the first part and start with Shema Mina. Dechibat chuppah.
Yeah, let me just see if I can find it. I printed this out because it's easier for me to read.
It's it's like just 3 lines down. I didn't skip very much.
Okay. Shema mina dechibat chuppah kona svarle. Afagav de'im tirtze lomar ka'amar. Sorry.
Yeah, if you want to translate it. Yeah.
We know the chibat chuppah is kona, even though, or he holds that way, even though there's even though he has an imtir tzelomar after, it's in the context of an imtir tzelomar, which may lead you to think he doesn't actually think that that's the case. V'chem psak Rabbeinu Chananel, v'chem pasak Rav Alfas zal chupa dechazi l'bia in delo chazi l'bia la. Katav Rambam zal shano v'perek zal perek asiri b'hilchot ishud. Mishatika nes l'chupa nikret nisua afal pish lo nivla v'hu shetei ruya l'bia. Avalim haytanida afal pish nechnes l'chupa v'nita chadima lo gamer nisimin lo gamer nisin adain v'harehi ka'arusa adain. So is now citing Rabbeinu Chananel, the Rif, the Rambam, who all think that chupat nida does not work. V'nireh shedikdek ze mahach deshmatin umefarish kach im tirtze lomar chibat chupa kona chupa de chaze labia mikre chupa o dilma loshna v'alta b'tekum hilkach lo havya chupa. So he's reading the Rambam as saying that a chupat nida is not actually a chuppah at all.
And sorry, just what that line is just him saying, like, it seems like Rambam learned this, right? Rambam isn't following the Gemara, and he's saying it seems like he's learning this from that Gemara that we said, that because it came in a teiko based on whatever rules, that's why it's that Gemara that's his source for chuppah needing to be chazia lebia. Did that make sense?
The kasher the mashna the mibaya le Rav Ashi a chuppah the hacha a lo mibaya le amatnitin deina isha ochela betruma ad shetikanes lechuppah nichnas lechuppah b'pirsanida mahu shetochal betruma mahu shetochal betruma. Right. So now he's asking, if that's the case, why is this question only asked here? Why doesn't Rav Ashi ask it on the Mishnah, or any other time that chuppah is mentioned previously before this moment? So v'chem mekam mekamot shenizkara lechuppah b'shas matzilim bayahach baya chuppah nida hevya chuppah ilav. Right. So why isn't this question brought anywhere else, or particularly any earlier instance of questions about chuppah? V'amedakdek b'shmo zo yavin de pshita le de chupat nida hevya chuppah have chuppah. Elam demi baye le im tetze lomar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah zachta b'chibat chuppah belobia chupat nida mahu chuppah de mitchazil bia in mistama al chuppah de chazil bia katavla v'lo al chuppah de lo chazil bia de afagav de chuppah ta chuppah lo katavla adata de chuppah she'ena ruya bia. Translate or summarize.
As you prefer, or if you want to pass it back to me, I can explain it. But if you feel comfortable, go for it. So as you said, right. So we've said that in no other place where it talks about chuppah, we should, if this were really a question, then we should have asked in every other place that they talk about chuppah, what about chuppah nida? Does it count as a chuppah or not? And so the Rosh says that it seems that it seems obvious that a chuppah nida is a chuppah. Rather, just here in this case, because we have this other question of whether she is zocha in the Tosefet based on the desire for the chuppah, or based on the desire for the need, or for the bi'ah. That's why we come and follow on with this question about, what if the chuppah happened under nida? And so, like, why would that be different? This is what Lexi was leading up to, and now you can read the next bit of the Rosh. We'll say, like, what the svara is.
The mistaber de ikar umdana el keruv dad shel chibat bia v'day lanu im nemar data de chuppah de chazil bia the ein lomar de shani hacha de pirsa nida achar kach. Mikom makom nehi de raya ein kan de chazil de chuppah k'shei nida. Gam lahem ein raya de lo chazil de chuppah. Vod al karchin hachi.
Wait, okay, yeah, sorry, do you want to explain that up until there? Sorry, did you already read the bolded part that I
Oh,
did
I did read the bold part, but I'll go back.
Sorry,
Yeah.
do you want to?
Right. Anyway, it seems reasonable to think that this question of when he's writing the Tosefet, that he is writing it about a case in which she is Ruya Labia, and not about a case in which she's going into the chuppah not Ruya Labia. Yes.
Yeah. Great.
And then he just makes this point about, there's a distinction about if she's not Ruya for Bia, the beginning of the chuppah versus she's Pirsanita Achar Kach.
Right.
Keep going.
Yeah, go for it.
מכל מקום, נהידראי אין כאן דחזי לחופה כשנידה, גם להם אין רע דלא חזי לחופה. Right. So as of now, up till now, there's not really any clear proof one way or the other as to whether she is Ruya l'chuppah, or whether the chuppah counts as a chuppah. V'od al karchin hachi perish nichnas l'chuppah v'kvar pirsanida. Right. Just also we must be talking about a case in which she was already pirsanida before she went into chuppah. The pirsanida achar kach kvar kna'a b'tchilat chuppah. The sof chuppah hi tchilat bia nimtza the chuppah kona b'tchilata. Right. If it's a case in which she is pirsanida after the chuppah, it must be the case that that case doesn't matter because he's already been kona her through the chuppah. Because if it were that the sof of chuppah is kona, the sof of chuppah is already the beginning of bia. That would be bia kona, and we already said the chuppah is kona.
Just going to pause here to see if there are any questions on what we've seen so far in the Rosh, or any just uncertainties, like something feels unclear, but you don't have a particular question. And I can't see everyone, so if you're raising your hand, speak up.
I think the last bit about like Pirsanida, Lachar chuppah, or like she nichnasa l'chuppah, also gets at the idea of the mental state, like to the extent like the weight that we're placing on that. Because if we say like, yeah, even if she was like Pirsanida after the chuppah, before they're able to actually have sex, we say that when she was like in the chuppah, when they were both there, they went into it thinking, oh, we're getting married, that's super exciting, and we're gonna have sex tonight. That was like the mental state, as it were, under the chuppah, and it doesn't actually matter that they no longer can, right? That like it definitely is emphasizing, at least according to the Rosh, understanding how significant kind of the way you're relating to one another in that moment is.
Right, specifically in that moment, yeah. I agree. All right. Would you like to keep going on? Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say regarding mental state, I've been a member of the Beitin in LA, Orthodox Beitin, and they had certain cases in which you wanted to do, something which was considered radical, which is hafka'at kiddushin, right? To retroactively get rid of the kid, which is unfortunately something which is not done often enough. But the few cases in which it's like the last thing you want to get into is trying to figure out the mental state of someone. Because I don't know, I went to a shrink for a long time. Maybe he knows. He never told me my mental state. It's like hard to figure out the kavanah. If you have an action that is a remez to a certain state, and you add that, even if this action seems distant, or not so distant, but it's normally considered to be weak, that you have, and you can connect that certainly with a chazaka that most times, or we normally assume that that kind of action shows a mental state. You're in a lot better shape in order to getting it done, getting it accepted. So I'm talking now, a long period after this discussion, but the mental state of the Dayanim and the Beitim are impacted by this. You're always trying to go to some form of chazaka if you can to rely upon it at the end.
That's a really
So
important point.
I want to leave it at that.
Yeah, like we've said that we're talking about how this is the nisuin are influenced by the mental state, but we're keeping it far away from talking about the mental state of any given couple, right? We're saying what matters is the mental state, but what matters, but that's how we're going to codify it so that we're making assumptions about the mental state of anyone or the general mental state about it. Sarah, did you have? Or Joel?
Yeah, I just, the one thing though is I think it's also important to keep in mind that what's at stake about whether or not Nisuin happened is a question of Mamona versus what's at stake whether or not Kiddushin happened is a question of Isura, right? It's a lot less at stake for Nisuin. I'm not people's money.
Not really. Not only. You also have a very big difference in Chumra. Arusa niskelet ve'nisua
Right, but as in
nichelet.
general, like
Right.
to
Yes,
say
okay.
that it didn't happen in Nisuin is mostly going like Lakula, right? As in like she doesn't get the Tosefet and you don't have to become Tameh for her, whatever. And like the consequences of being wrong about that are not so high. Whereas like with Kiddushin, we want to say the Chumrah had happened because the consequences of saying it didn't happen are much higher.
I will take that, but I mean, to most of us, especially in a world where we're not executing anybody anyway, I think that's a lot less of a point that we care about.
But I think your point will also speak to the next part of the Rosh, which we've already started talking about, which is the fact that this is right, which is the fact that this is like, if we're talking about Nisuin in general, yes, like it sounds like the Rambam is talking about, whereas the Rosh is pushing us toward, we're not talking about Nisuin, whether Nisuin are affected in general, we're talking about specifically this Tosefet, which is very, very much only a question of Mammon. Like you're saying, Joel. Yeah, Sarah.
Thank
I
you.
had a question. Oh, go ahead, Rev Landis.
No, thank you. This was good.
I had a question about the line that you had in bold, if you want to scroll up for a second. Right, because there it seems like the point is something like, well, we just assume that when he writes the Tosefet, he's writing the Tosefet because he wants to marry her. And so therefore, if he can't like kind of complete the job, then it doesn't work, right? But I wonder whether that opens up a door in like the contemporary reality where we seem to do Chupat Nida, and we assume that that works, and that's a sort of standard, like his intention to marry her is not different. Because like it happened to be that this is like when you rented the wedding hall like 6 months in advance or whatever.
We're gonna see
that would open up some contemporary door.
It's in fact not only contemporary, already and I think it was the 16th century, there's a source that says something similar that we'll see shortly.
Right, that like obviously that therefore like using, basically you turn that logic around, that like in the contemporary period where obviously he's intended, even when it's a Chupat Nida, he's intending to marry her kind of all the way, but then maybe she should get the Tosefet. If that's the logic you're using.
Yes. Yeah. If the reasoning is about what his intention was in writing the Tosefet, then yeah. Exactly.
I mean, maybe that's just not what you think is going, like, might be reasonable to say that's just not like how the mechanics of this work, but.
Right. Yeah, as usual, that's the question, but that is a door that is used, which we'll see. Great, Aaron, do you want to finish up the?
It looked like Lexi was trying to say something, but we.
Oh, sorry, I can't see around. Lexi, were you trying to say something? Oh, Lexi, you're on mute, or I can't hear you.
Your microphone is not close enough.
That basically, we could say even when we do Chupat Nida, that potentially that law doesn't change because, right, the case where we're debating this is one in which, like, he dies, he dies like before anything else happens. And potentially the idea is kind of like, what relationship have they built, like before that. And we could say that like the mind, the like headspace that you're in under the chuppah potentially is actually related to like what you anticipate happening in the immediate future, even if it's like chupat nida, that's normal. You're like, yeah, she's going to become tahor in a couple of days, and then we'll have sex and it'll be great and we'll have a nice marriage. Like that potentially the way you're relating to that experience is different if you're like, okay, we're going to have a nice marriage and like in 6 days I'll be able to have sex with her, versus like this is our wedding day and we're going to have our wedding night. That if we're talking about like the in between there, potentially even when chupat nida is normal, that might not change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. All right. Do you want to keep going?
ועוד כתב שם, ולא תינשא עד שתטהר, ואין מברכים לה ברכת חתנים עד שתטהר. נראה דרעתו היא מהי דרש מחילתין, לפיכך חלה
Wait, just quickly, that's Od Katav. Who's that?
This is the Rambam.
No, Rambam. Great.
לפיכך חלה הוא או שחלתה היא, או שפרסנידה אין מעלה למזונות. עלמא דפרסנידה אינה יכולה לכנוס, כמו בחלתה. ולאו ראיה היא. דהאו דחשיב לאונס, לא בשביל שאסור לכנוס, אלא משום דבהגעת זמן הנישואין מחייב הבעל במזונותיה, משום שיש לו לכנוס. ומצוי ממר, למה אכנוס מאחר שאינה ראויה לביאה? הכל יודעים למה כלה נכנסה לחופה, ומאחר שאונס מעכבה שאינה ראויה לביאה, אינו חייב במזונותיה. So he's saying, right, the Rambam says you should not marry a woman Anida until she's Titar. And the Rosh is assuming that his proof is from the beginning of the Masechet, where we learn if he's sick, she's sick. If she's Pirsa Anida, he does not have to give her mezonot because the wedding is delayed, or the wedding is delayed, and he does not have to give her mezonot.
Right. Normally, there's a time limit, as we saw. Yeah, that the marriage has to happen in a year. And if the marriage if he delays the marriage, then he's still responsible for her after that year for providing for her after that year. And go ahead. And the Rosh counters that this doesn't prove it by how?
Right. He says this is not a proof. The fact that it is considered an ones is not in order to make it asur to do this thing, but rather in order to make the Baal not have to feed her. But it is not saying that it is asur for him to marry her under any of these circumstances.
Right. Is that clear to everyone? Any questions on that? All right, for the sake of time, I'm gonna have you skip. He brings another possible proof from a similar Gemara and rejects it in a similar way. And if you want to skip to וכן ראיתי.
וכן ראיתי בכל המקומות שאינן חושבים לברך ברכת חתנים לקהל הנידה, אבל אינן נכנסת עמו לסתר, אלא הוא ישן בין אנשים והיא ישנה בין אנשים. Everywhere I've seen, there's no choshesh for doing birkat chatanim for a kala zanida. There's no, but they do not have any sort of private yichud, and he sleeps with the men and she sleeps with the women.
So he's been arguing the texts with Rambam, and then at the end he brings evidence from the experience of the practice, which is that, in fact, we do chupat nida. Any questions or last thoughts on
Well, I just want to say this. Rosh, it reads like a modern tshuva. In other words, he's justifying a practice, and he's bringing all these sources, and he's giving them a whole new reading. It's really quite remarkable, the new reading that he's giving all these sources to allow the chupat nida.
Yeah, I find it fairly convincing. There are some parts that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to read it the way he's reading it, but it's but you can. It reminds me of a modern tshuva. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks.
Well, when you say a modern tshuva, who are you thinking of right now?
Well, you know
right
me.
Now, I know who you're thinking.
I think I wanted to say it generally. Yeah, Rav Moshe Feinstein. It seems like.
But because he's terrific in reviewing all the material, and he makes an argument.
And he's not afraid to reinterpret original sources original.
Not afraid to find the emes, you would say.
Is not afraid to interpret a Gemara completely different from everybody else. Here we have the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rabbeinu Hananel all reading it the same way, and the Rosh is just like, oh, I have a different way of reading it, and that's the halacha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Great. Who would like to read that on the Rif that we skipped?
I can read it.
Great, thanks.
Okay. הלכות נתנה. כיוון שכתב כן הריף, זה סתם משמע שאינו קנה לשום דבר, לא לירשה ולא לטמא. לכן כתב הרמב"ם, ז"ל בפרק העשירי מהלכות אישות. אבל אם הייתה נידה, אף על פי שנכנסה לחופה ונתאחד עמה, לא גמרו הנישואין, והרי כארס עדיין עד כאן. והדבר תימה, כיוון דקיימלן ביבמת, יש חופה לפסולת, אלמנה לכהן גדול וחברתה. חופת נידה למה לא תקנה? לפיכך נראה כדברי האומר, דלא יבאי לן אלא לעניין תוספת כתובה, אבל בשאר דברים קונה.
Great.
Okay, so we got the Rif and the Rambam's opinion being quoted just like the Rosh did, but he's astonished by this. We have this rolling in Yavama, but there's chupah psulat, like a widow for the Kohen Gadol. So why wouldn't a chupat nida acquire, given the analogy? Therefore, it seems like it goes according to the person who says that we're specifically only asking about Tosefet, but for all other purposes, chuppah acquires.
Great.
Chuppah
So
nida
another
acquires.
reinforcement for the Rosh. And next source is the Shiltei Giburim, which I looked up. And do people know what else this person wrote? Harav Yoshua Boaz from Italy. I was excited to find this out.
Also the author of a lot of our fun glosses.
Yeah. The like the what is it, the Torah Or, all the psukim, like all those things that I didn't even realize it was a person, one person. Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah, Mishpat and the Masoret Shas. Yeah. So I feel like we owe him a read because he helps us so much. But let's skip down to Veri Piresh if someone would like to. Lexi, do you want to take it?
Sure. Vivi Piresh had the buyer of Ashi נכנסה לחופה ולא נבלעה, היינו חופה שהחתן סבור שהיא טהורה בשעת חופה ונמצאת נידה. משום הכי מספקא ליה אי קנה, דשמא חיבת בעילה קונה, ואילו ידע החתן שאינו יכול לבעול עתה, שמא לא היה כונס עתה, right? So he explained that when Rav Ashi asks this case about like they go to the chuppah and they're not able to have sex, that it's a case, it's referring to a chuppah where the chatan thought she was tahor when at the time of the chuppah and then finds out that she's nida. And so that's why we're uncertain, because like maybe like and like maybe if he had known that he wouldn't be able to have sex right now immediately, maybe he wouldn't have like married her at this time. Maybe he would have like put it off. So gam regilim hayu az lichnos tahorot v'lo hayu regilin lichnos nidot, and like therefore we also generally will do chuppot with people who are tahara and not nidot.
Wait, sorry, how are you translating it?
Regilin, like that, like it was practice or normal, or like that is what's expected generally.
I think it's more specifically that is what was expected. I think this is bringing up, right, this is bringing up Sarah's point even before contemporary psak, where he's saying like actually it's just that's how they ruled then, because the expected was that she would be in purity, but now maybe that's different. Go ahead.
Right. So hayu az lichnos tahora v'lo hayu regilin lichnos nidot. Tamrinam perak kama im pirsani da eno malala mizonot aval im modi'ino to shehi nida v'af al pi ken konsa lechupa hayvadai knuya lo miyad doaseh chupa kadei livol k'shi torah. So like, okay, specifically the case of Ashi was uncertain about. It was one where like he thought that she was tahor and then finds out that she's nida. But if he knew that she was nida going into it, and he agreed to do a chuppah nida, then like of course she gets like mazono and gets the tosefet or whatever, because like he knew she was nida. He still decided to do the wedding with her. Then he's like, great, we'll have a wedding, and in a couple of days we'll have sex, and it'll be great. That was like, on his mind, and it wasn't something that's like we're not so worried about what his intent would be, or like should have done differently if she were tahara.
Or what his intent was when he wrote the Tosefet into the Ketubah.
Right. לכן אומר רי שיש להודיע לחתן כשהוא כונס אם נתעורר מיד אם לאו, לכן נכון לעשות. You should therefore tell the chatan before the chuppah whether she's a nida or not.
Great. Questions about this? Yeah, Alan.
I think Aaron may have had the same question, but just the last three words. Are we reading that as psak, as general advice? What's the strength of the valence?
Good question. Does anyone?
That's usually advice, right? Like I feel like if it was like really hardline psak, they use stronger language. But he's like, you should tell the chatan. That's the ideal way of doing things.
But if you don't, if the bride does not tell the chatan,
right? So potentially, right? I guess it leaves open the potential that if the bride, if the chatan does not know, and they do the chuppah during the nida, and he dies afterward, then we might rule that she doesn't get the tosefet that he wrote in the ketubah.
Right, like there isn't actually.
Hmm?
No, please, Lexi, you're in the middle.
No, I was just gonna say that like Bezrat Hashem, there isn't actually that much of a nafkamina as to whether you're doing this most of the time, because like presumably like you'll continue the chuppah and you'll do whatever, but that like in the specific scenario of if he died before they were able to have sex, then in that scenario, if we hadn't told him she was a nida, it would be relevant.
I do have a family tradition that I've been told orally that my great-grandmother, one of my two great-grandmothers after whom I'm named, was married before she married my great-grandfather. She was married to someone and he was killed before they consummated the wedding. And so in that case, I don't have a family tradition about like what her where she was in her menstrual cycle at that point, but I guess it could be relevant to this issue. Yeah.
Only thinking about the HaEzer in the end to tell the chatan. I think that this goes really back to the machloket what chuppah actually is. That's how I learned the Siman. Like actually we are cholik on the Rambam, and we don't think that even chuppah is yichud. The chuppah doesn't have a lot to do as an action to biyah, but because we want to be yoytze dechoiv on all the shitot, it's ra'ui le'odia lachatan that if she's nida. But if we didn't modia lachatan, she's also the chuppah also mo'il, because we simply rule against the Rambam. Like we think that chuppah nida is chuppah.
But I'm not sure that helps us with the opinions that chuppah. That like I'm not sure that Rambam the Rambam necessarily would care that we told him.
No, that's exactly the point. Telling him doesn't really change, but like it changes, like it changes in the setting of how they understand the Rambam. Meaning it's like they're applying the Rambam to their mindset. That's how I understood it. Like we try to like go as closest to the Rambam as possible in a situation of chupat nida.
I think it's nice, but also remember this is the opinion of the Ri, which means he probably doesn't know the Rambam there. Right, the Ri is right.
Depends what Ri is, which Ri is, because there are many Ri's. So
I assume this is from the Rebbe Yitzchak ben Dampierre of the Tosfot, right? Is my assumption here. If you just quote him as a stam Ri, that's my guess, right? Which means that he's not in the world of the Rambam at all, potentially. So
right, this is in fact, yeah. What we've said so far is we've sort of read the Gemara simply as talking about the Tosefet as opposed to the rest of Nisu'in. And the Rambam seems to take that Gemara and expand it to be all about all of Nisuin. At least like, or maybe I like the Rosh, but I think that's a reasonable read. And the Rosh is, at least according to the Rosh is taking it back to just being about Nisuin. And then what Ri actually did was, he says it's even more limited than that. That even in the Gemara, when they were talking about the Tosefet, they were talking about the issue of Nida, they're really only talking about Nida when he doesn't know about it.
I have a question. Is this hoda'ah that you make for the purpose of making the chuppah work, or is it just for the purpose of making sure that she gets the money if he dies?
Oh, I see. That's a good question. You could apply the Ri's reasoning. Let's see, is it explicit?
And does he maybe? I think he's saying that the chuppah for sure works,
Right.
but because of this one eventuality that maybe he dies, therefore you should modia.
Right, but in theory, you could apply the Ri's reasoning to the Rambam's read that it's talking about all of Nisuin. Yeah, but I don't think that's what Shiltei Diburim is doing. But
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so. I think he's just saying. I think the only reason for this hoda'ah is for the financial aspect.
Right, he's saying not only do we hold by the Rosh, not only are we saying that the Rosh is right, but we're even going farther and saying that the Ri, right, we're adding the Ri to the Rosh. Yeah, I think that's right. Aaron, did you have a?
Right, I agree. I think I agree with Rav Nachum that it's possible that Ri is originally talking about Nisuin in general, and whether or not he is, it seems like he's being applied here perhaps to the specific question of the Tosefet, which then leaves open the question of, okay, if there's no hoda'ah, and then she does get the Tosefet, if that's how we're reading the Ri, that he thinks hoda'ah equals you get the Tosefet. There's no hoda'ah. You have no way of knowing ex post facto if she was in Nida, right? If she doesn't tell him, he never knows, and if he happens to die, she will then get the Tosefet. So then we also have the Riyaz's position that the Diavad, if she actually takes the Tosefet and she happened to have been in Nida, that doesn't matter anyway.
Great. Do you want to read the Riyaz since you're bringing it up? This is related to Joel's point today.
Sure. נכנסה לחופה ולא נבלה עד שנתאלמנה או נתגרשה, אם לא הייתה בחופתה ראויה לביאה כגון שפרסה נידה, הרי זה ספק בתלמוד, ומספק אינה גובה תוספת. Right, so if she goes into the chuppah and she's nida, it's a safek about whether she gets the tosefet. So because of safek, she doesn't get the tosefet. Ve'im tafsa ein motzi'im miyada, כמו שביארנו למעלה בדין הספק. Right, but if she happened to have been nida and she did somehow acquire the tosefet, we don't take it away.
Right, because we're getting this whole more machmer opinion from a safek anyway, from a teko, and therefore, like, we'll leave it in whatever state, like in terms of, because this is an issue of mammon, like Joel was saying, we're not going to move money from one to another based on something that's in safek. So if she already has it, we're not going to give it back to his estate. But if she hasn't gotten it yet, then we're not going to the tosefet. then she's not going to claim it. Okay. Let's see. I think we'll skip the tour, and the Beit Yosef is mostly summarizing the sources that we've already seen here, and also here in the Siman is where he brings the sources that discuss the issue of what is chuppah that we saw in Nun-Hey. So for a review of all the sources we saw in the last 3 weeks, like including this week, the Beit Yosef is nice. There's one line that I wanted to bring out that that explains something that we've been seeing that hasn't been explained explicitly yet, and that is, does someone want to volunteer to read this, or it's just one line? So I can, yeah, sure, Joel, go for it.
I just liked it so much. So
oh, great, perfect.
וכבר נודע דרך הגאונים והרמב"ם ז"ל, דכי באי בעיה באם תצא לומר. Right, so this is the way, when you have a question in the Gemara, it's a challenge in the Gemara that's followed by an im tevse lomar baya. The baya kamaita havik ilu nifshata hahi baya kamaita. right? And it's the first question, right? The before the im tosei lamar, that one, by the fact you're willing to ask him im tosei lamar on it, means that one you've answered, you've already solved the first question, right? Essentially with the im tosei lamar tree, essentially says, yeah, I accept that first position. So
Great. And why do you love this so much?
I thought it was really logical, and I've always thought about like how do you deal with the im tosei lamar, and I like, I think this is an interesting way of the Rambam and the Geonim to solve it, and I didn't realize that they were consistent about it. So
right, and I think there's some. I looked it up.
Procedurally, it means that you don't always have to be burdened by every doubt.
Yeah.
If you can say, okay, we can take that off the table. Of course, it's in the text, so it's always, but taking it off the table. It's just too much stuff to leave on the table.
Right. Yeah, it seems to me like a transition, like, yeah, anyway. I was listening to a lecture by Professor Christine Hayes, whose thing is about like how the Chazal was all about like keeping options alive rather than limiting options. And this feels to me like a move from that Chazalic mindset toward wanting to limit things and make an actual psak that people can follow. And I thought it was interesting also in contrast to how we saw the Rosh phrased his summary at the beginning, that he said afal gav de'im tirtze lomar ka'amar. Here the Beit Yosef is saying it's davka biglal she'im tirtze lomar ka'amar, that we rule that way. All right. I think, Sarah, do you want me to start? Like, how much time do you want for?
I think honestly, we're gonna have to do some of this stuff to do my sources anyway. So I think that it's not worth rushing too much.
Okay.
Makes sense. Like, it just, in other words, we're gonna have to do the like. These are all sources that kind of are relevant anyway, so I don't feel like pressured.
Great. So in that case, this is pretty much the background I want to do. Then we can look at the Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll see. We can look back at the Shulchan Aruch, or we can go now to the Rama, where. So I'm glad this is background. So we're going to do. I guess this is sort of moving on to a different topic. The Rama is going to bring a whole bunch of different things that are important, but I decided not to focus on, and maybe that was a mistake. But we can go through them and at least see them in the Rama.
Let's take 5 minutes right now.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're at a good point, I think.
Great.
And let's come back at 10:05.
Okay.
We're back.
Great. Yeah. All right. I've rather than sharing screen, I've put it in the chat in case anyone doesn't have their Shulchan Aruch handy. Josh, would you like to read for us?
I'm reading the Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah. Siman Aleph.
We did this, no?
Yeah, we did this. If you want to skip to the Rama, we can skip to the Rama. Let's skip to the Rama.
Okay. Rama, Haga. Vayen le'el resh siman nun hey, ma'u nikach chuppah, we did this. וצריכים לכתוב הכתובה קודם החופה, כדי שתהא חופה הראויה לביאה. The ketubah has to be written before the chuppah, so the chuppah, in all aspects, is ראויה לביאה. ולמען דאמרת חופת נידה הווה חופה, אף על פי שאינה ראויה לביאה, הוא הדין אם לא כתב כתובה. Okay, so if you don't require that the chuppah is ראויה לביאה, then even if you didn't write the ketubah beforehand, then the chuppah effectuates something. ומכל מקום נוהגים לכתחילה לכותבה קודם לכן. Okay, but obviously we're strict and we write the ketubah before the chuppah. אישה חולנית, חולת מוות, אף על פי שכונסה עם המיטה תחת חופה, כדי שירשנה בעלה, אינו חופה כלל. מאחר שהוא אינה ראויה כלל לביאה, ואין בעלה יורשה. So a deathly sick woman, even if she comes into the chuppah in a deathbed, in order that they have a legal marriage, and that he can inherit her, that doesn't count as a chuppah because there's no possibility of bia happening, and her husband doesn't inherit anything from her. Knasal.
I just want to say that I found that really interesting, like, topic to study also, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it, but it comes from a tshuva of the Rosh, and yeah.
I feel like it's interesting because I feel like it's a classic trope in like somewhat maudlin like romance novels of like the person who is like, you know, deathly ill and they get married like right before they die. And it's like, oh, they still got married. And actually, like it's like a whole thing. And I'm wondering if that would be like the same deen or different, because here it's like very explicit, the tshuva of the Rosh, that like it's like, oh, they should get married so that the, you know, land doesn't become hekdesh, instead like is inherited, right? As opposed to like they're getting married, so they can be married before he or she dies. Like, you know, I'm wondering if like that was the kavanah, if it's like, okay, well, there's like the kind of.
I don't know if the romance aspect comes into it, but the Taz does take issue with the Ramaz with the Ramaz choice of language. The Ramah makes it sound like it's she wants to give him, she has property that she wants to inherit to him, as opposed to the Rosh's tshuva, which seems to be about where she's not really there, and it's her family that wants to make sure that because it's this whole complicated situation.
Yeah,
with
but
father. But I don't know about the romance.
I mean,
although if like the fact that she wants to give him this gift, I guess yeah, is some indication that she like wants something for him anyway.
But if we continue in the Riz way on like Leodia la Sheinida, if there was like this, of course this isn't the nosel of the tshuva of the Rosh, but like if we take a situation of a couple of that one of them is actually about to die, like in this romantic trope, if they are both knowledgeable of the situation, probably it works at the same. Like even though it's not realibia, they want to get married al dat, they want to be married for being married. Like they machriz, like they're announcing that they are not doing nisuin as normal people, they're or in normal circumstances. So
right. What's interesting in the Rosh's tshuva, which I consider, is that he's concerned about someone else's dat, right? There's the dat of the two people getting married, and then in that particular case, there's her father has left a will that says this money is reserved for her to use as dowry, but if she dies before it's used, it goes to hekdesh, and so like it is about like questions of who's in like dat and whose intention is being respected, but it's not just about the two getting married. So yeah, I think that is the direction that the inquiry sort of goes.
Right, but as the Ramah brings it, isn't the Ramah's point to just say that Ra'ui Labia,
right?
The definition of that term, it has to be that that even if she's not Ra'ui Labia, but she has to be eventually Ra'ui Labia, and not right. But if she's not Ra'ui Labia at all, right, then there's no heter. Then that's not, in other words, even if we say she's not Ra'ui Labia, we do agree in principle that she has to be Ra'ui Labia at some point in the future.
Yeah. No, I think the Rama has a reasonable svara on his own part. That like this isn't what we call marriage. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Even if you don't think it links to the Rosh's tshuva. Yeah. Thanks. Josh, do you want to keep going?
כנסה לחופה ולא ברך ברכת חתנים, הווה חופה גמורה, דאין הברכות מעכבות. Yes, if he's in the chuppah and he didn't say the brachot, sheva brachot, it still works. Right?
So what does it mean? Kala below bracha asura kanida.
Yeah, did we not do that? Did we have that?
Yeah, we
debate
did. We
already?
discussed
Yeah.
it last
did,
week.
yeah.
We discussed it. Yeah,
That was in my
Is
head.
this a
already.
stira?
it's not a stira because we said that bracha doesn't mean bracha; it means chuppah.
Means chuppah.
Mhm.
Some people said that anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. ומברך אחר כמה ימים. Right. Okay, so you בדיעבד you would still say the bracha, but it's not reliant on the bracha, the brachot. ולכתחילה יברך אותה קודם שיתייחד עמה. לכתחילה, that's you should say the bracha עובר לעשייה, I guess. ועיין לאל סימן נ"ה, which we did, ונהגו עכשיו לברך תחת החופה קודם שנתייחד עמו. Nowadays we do the brachot under the chuppah before ייחוד. ונהגו שהחתן והכלה מתענין ביום חופתן. There's a custom for the chatan and kala to fast on the day of their wedding. Gesundheit. אם קידש בטעות והיו לו נישואין עימה, ואחר כך נודע שהקידושין היו בטעות, אף על פי שחוזר ומקדשה, אין צריך לברך שנית 7 ברכות, וסגי לה בברכות הראשונות. So if the kiddushin were invalid or in bad faith or on shaky grounds, but the nisuin happened, and then the kiddushin are fixed, then the brachot of the nisuin don't need to be repeated. They still stand.
Yeah.
Really interesting. ויש אומרים לעשות חופה תחת השמיים, וסימן טוב שיהיה זרעם ככוכבי השמיים. The chuppah should be under stars of heaven.
Great.
This is a custom very much kept in Jerusalem, that you try to go outside for the chuppah. Even if you're in a hall, you go downstairs. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but people do that. And we saw last week or 2 weeks ago that maybe it has to do with also a different reason to be in the courtyard of the synagogue, to be different from the goyim.
Oh,
right. We suggested that, but that's nobody. I don't know if that's I think it's our own chiddush.
I also I think it was this Bach where he points out that he's like, yeah, we don't think we think that the chuppah is we talked about this last time, it's the meal that they eat together, and then there's this privacy, and it's not appropriate for me to be rushing them and standing outside that. He's like, that's why we also do this chuppah with the klun dasut and the little thing. It's because people want to witness something. They want to be at the wedding. So you do this nice little thing under the little whatever, and everyone can watch that. And then you don't all have to crowd outside the cheder yichud.
Aaron, did you have something?
Oh, just right. There's just this. I mean, there's a side at the end about your children being kochvei shemaim. Right. This goes back also to a broader discussion about what is the purpose of marriage and how connected it is to childbearing. Right. Which I think also bears on this question of chupat nida. Right. It not just being a formal issue for them, probably about if a woman's in nida and therefore they can't have bia immediately, but you might think if someone's in nida and they can't have sex immediately, that actually maybe marriage is about something other than childbirth, or that children are not the most. I'm not sharing my own opinions about marriage, but for them, right, especially for the Shulchan Aruch as opposed to the Torah, that the primary locus of marriage is about childbirth, and that has some relation to how soon you're having bia, how important bia is versus other teleologies of marriage.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point, Aaron. That's very interesting. And you're connecting it with the kochvei shamayim, that we're trying to do different things to sort of give a child rearing, a child producing aspect of this event. Very interesting.
Nice, Carl. Okay, and with that,
I think Rav has his hand up though.
Yes.
Okay, a current overwhelming practice to avoid chupat nida is for the woman, because it's not working out time-wise, to take a pill beforehand, which actually is effective in preventing chupat nida, but it also is effective in preventing pregnancy. And therefore, that's a whole article one of you can write. But I would say, I'm not sure you should quote, but I'm not, no, but it could very well be that then, listen, there's, two aspects of pregnancy, two aspects of BIA. It has to do with the issue of having issue, and the other, of course, is ONA, and which is extraordinarily important. So we've moved to even within that, we shouldn't use the word even. If we moved within the deepest part of observant community to the fact that these are people who have rove cases, let's say it that way, have not had sexual experience. We want to make sure that experience is possible at a time of great affection, joy, and being halfway drunk, but totally, partially tired from all the event, but nevertheless a feeling of goodness to each other. And we want to preserve that. That might be one answer. And I want to add one more thing to this. It's very important that the Kala has told the Chassan or the Rav has told the Chassan that the full fulfillment of when it is a chupas nida, there's a chupas nida, and the small little things that are done within the chuppah are to show that it's not to the public, but small. It's only under the chuppah, as it were. The trained eye will see it, but nobody else will see it, to reaffirm that it's a chupas nida, and that the full fulfillment will take place in a short period of time. The third aspect that comes together with all this, that we need to spend time regarding it, I'm not sure within what context, is the fear also of the fear of marital rape, and that can come in the night of the wedding, where usually it's the chassan who is fully excited, and the kala might find herself defenseless. So it's a jam-packed issue. It's a jam-packed issue, and I agree with what Wander says also. I think that's also part of it. Okay, I spoke enough.
Okay, we can we'll be getting, hopefully by the end, to a discussion of some of the more contemporary issues about hormonal intervention. I'll say that if we don't get to it, which we might not, there's an article I linked to at the end of the source sheet by Dina Zimmerman, who's a doctor and also a US at Halacha, who writes about these issues, and she basically thinks that she comes down against hormonal intervention mostly for kind of medical reasons. Anyway, we'll get there when we get there, but the article itself is worth reading also because it includes a pretty good biological discussion of just what the issues are, and also how the mechanics of how these things works and what the risks associated with that hormonal intervention can be for some people. So with that, yes, I tried. I really tried. Okay, so let us, I thought we'd start with just reading the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch on this, and then we can go back to some of the earlier relevant sources. Would people like me to share my screen as well as? Okay. Can people see? Yeah. Okay, can I get someone to read the Tur? I'm just gonna call him. Joel, will you read the Tur?
Yeah, why not? All right. Aval, we're just stepping in the middle of the Torah. Im haitani da, afal pisha kantala chupa v'nicha cherima, lo gamruha nesuin, varehi adain ke'arusa. So this is like the Rambam, right? That if she's nida and he brings her into the chuppah, all right, and has yichud, that nisuin was not affected, and she's still in the state of erusin. Velotina senida ad shetitar, right? And since she shouldn't marry someone in nida, those shouldn't bring her into chuppah until she becomes Torah. And same thing with birkat chatanim, right? You shouldn't say them until she is Torah from nida. All right, adkan. All right, that's it. It's all the Rambam there. That's the open quotes we didn't see, but that's the end. Veronia v'harosh zal katav shenikret chuppah lechol davar chutz mizeh she'eno gova tosefet. So we saw this. The Rosh says though, no, that's if she's nida when she comes to chuppah, all that does is prevent her from collecting tosefet ketubah. Ve'cholim levarech birkat chatanim, and you can say shava barachot. But they shouldn't do yichud together. Rather that when they sleep, they should, and presumably also for when they're awake as well, right? That there should be other people around, or they should sleep in separate areas with other people kind of watching them.
Great. Can you just spell out like what the svara is there for why that would be necessary?
Well, the idea is that generally we see that when you have a couple who hasn't yet had sex, right, there's this really great desire, maybe also going back to what Rav Landis was saying, maybe only desire on part of one of them, in fact, right? And so, having yichud is that they're not going to, the Isur of karet of nida isn't going to be enough to stop them from having sex with one another. But once they've already had sex before, let's say that their dot is a little bit more quelled and a little more calm, and they'll realize, there's an Isur karet, we're not going to, and therefore, they can have yichud without having sex. So.
Right. So I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but it's worth remembering that this is a kind of inversion of the set of assumptions we had about the case in Gittin of the people, the fact that like they actually might be more likely to sleep with each other if they're alone, if they've previously had sex, have a relationship before, than if not. Just thought that was worth noting.
I do think that's a case where we're assuming there is no Isur karet on the table at the same time, right? Necessarily, there are people who were married, right? She's not nida, and so it's two people had sex outside of marriage, which the Rambam doesn't like, but or even within, right? Because they're getting remarried.
Divorced.
Yeah, they're getting remarried through this. So
right, so they've had right, but then it seems bizarre to say that like people are more likely to do the kind of quote unquote wrong thing when there isn't Isur karet than when there isn't. That seems strange. Like you would hope that they would, we went through this last week, but you would hope that they would be less likely to do it.
Yeah.
When there's Isur karet than when there's not, but maybe not everyone is so serious about these things. Okay.
The Gemara in Ketubot brings that, I don't know if you guys did this at the end last week, brings that up in the case of like of Avelut versus this case, right?
So we're gonna do that Gemara because I think it just like, I didn't have it on the source sheet originally, but I realized that it like came up in some of the later stuff. So I thought I would make us all do it. But let's just see the Shulchan Aruch, which kind of just paskins is pretty straightforwardly, and then we'll go back to the sources. Do you want to do the Shulchan Aruch as well because it's pretty short?
Sure. All right. Kasher hadavar shelo tinaseh ad shetitaher. Right. So he says, he doesn't say. It sounds like good lechatchila language, like don't do this, right? Don't do chuppah before. She is Torah from her nida, but then the Rambam says, he says we're not so careful about this, and we don't wait, right? But you shouldn't be a surprise, right? That you should tell him first beforehand before they get to the chuppah that she's in nida. So which is, would be like quite a surprise if they got married and at the end they're like, okay, now you're going to go sleep in this room and she's going to sleep, with her friends in this room. So.
Right. Although I mean, I don't know this is like whatever Torah's citations, but I think that the other issue here is that we just want to avoid confusion about the Tosefet for the reasons we just talked about.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. So
I think that's the main issue here. Although the other issue seems important and relevant for all the reasons and it just suggested. Okay. So it seems like, right, the overall picture we got from the Shulchan Aruch is that you shouldn't do this, but potentially it might be okay. It might be effectual if you do. And the Rama basically comes down saying we just allow it. And we don't force you to delay the wedding. We don't sort of make too much chaos. We just need to make sure that we tell you what's happening. Okay. Questions, thoughts about that before we proceed?
I think it's interesting that he writes Ein Mamtinin. I would maybe put extra emphasis on that because, in other words, we don't want to delay. A marriage is a mitzvah. We want to do it if aside from, there's people there and maybe you hired a hall, but also it's a mitzvah. You're all ready. You should do the mitzvah. Don't let obstacles that are not necessarily really obstacles prevent you. Which might then lend you to say, well, using a hormonal treatment won't cause me to mamtin.
Right.
In other words, he's only saying ein mamtinin. He's not saying if you had some theoretical invention that he could never imagine, like hormonal treatment, maybe that you would be in favor of. He's not saying not to do that.
Right. I mean, I think actually he would be in favor of it. Like he may end up being more in favor. He's saying we're not sort of like midaktiks to stop it, but I think he might be willing to say, well, if you have a sort of get out of jail free card, then you should use it, right? That was a bad terminology, but you see what I'm saying, right? That like it might be better to just avoid the problem altogether. Yeah.
I just want to. I think I agree with both of you. I mean, there's decision making that's hard decision making, and you decide on one principle, and that's it. Decision making, which is situational. I am still amazed that this has become the complete minhag, of a full community. But maybe that's what happens. This kind of what works, and therefore, the ein mamtinim, as Rav Nachum says, it's very powerful. But then something else became more powerful in terms of people's actions. It's good to have this soft decision making, which also involves community. No one says in the community you have to do this, except makes sense to do it, and so they've kind of chosen.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole exercise is in a certain way of like letting a navigation of things that are sort of they don't want to decide too hard one way or the other.
Yeah, right.
Rafael.
Yeah, I only wanted to say that if we go on a different way, we can even say that no, dafka the Shulchan Aruch would say that שעכשיו שאין מדקדקים בזה, especially us after generations that people did so, there isn't actually any reason to try to go back to a more lekatchilish situation, because that was now defined as a normal marriage. If we go back to המנהג אצלם היה של עשה טהורות, their minhag, the first minhag in the Gemara, was to do in a matzav of tahara. But if we completely move from that, exactly like we moved from a chuppah that's actual closed room or something like that to 4 poles in a sheet, we don't actually have any necessity to go back there. It's like halachic nostalgia, if I'll be sarcastic.
Right, why would you bother doing this if now we have this longstanding practice? I think the thing that would push you away from that in the Rama is this mikol makom tov la'adil hachatan, right? Which seems to suggest that the distinction does matter, right? It's not just that okay, we don't even care anymore. We do care, and we have a potentially kind of awkward conversation with the chatan about it.
Yeah,
Like-
but that goes back to the Ri. And the Ri's opinion isn't actually the Rambam, meaning the Ri doesn't say that actually Chupat Nida doesn't work. It doesn't work if the Khatan doesn't want it precisely. But like, and it's also
Yeah.
Tov Leodia, because like we assume now that everybody does Chupat Nida. So okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder whether the Tov Dia is just like, you know, in the case, God forbid, the Khatan dies. Why should that conversation be awkward? I don't think it has to be awkward, but it could be, is all I'm saying, Yavni.
They're going to be married. They should be talking about these things. But anyway, yeah.
I agree with you. I'm just, you know, like naming what is often the reality, I think, which is that it's
in a door in which people talk about everything. You know, hard to see there was a door in which people didn't talk about anything. So
yeah, and I think
Fair enough, fair enough.
yeah, like, you know, whatever. I'll lay my cards on the table and say that I think it's good to have conversations about these things, but again, that isn't always the reality. Okay, so I wanted to see two Gemarot, which are we gonna do all of these? Okay, yeah, we're gonna do them. Which I think were kind of in the background of some of what we saw in the first half of Shiur, and I thought maybe it would be good to see them inside. So the first is this Gemara in Yevamot, which we might only do the first half of, which just seems to say that there is a chuppah for women who you like can't have sex with. Can I get someone to read? Lexi, do you want to read?
Sure. So just the Itmar. Itmar Rav Amar yesh chuppah lepsulot, u'shmuel Amar in chuppah b'psulot. Right. So I think this is the source that the Ran quoted earlier when contradicting at least the idea of the Rambam and the Rif, which is like Rav. We have a Amoraic dispute. Rav says that like there is like chuppah, okay, like chuppah can be effective for those who are puzzled to be married to one another. Shmuel says there is not. Amar Shmuel umoda li Abba betinoket pechota mibat shalosh shanim v'yam echad hoil ve'en la bia en la chuppah. Shmuel's like, but don't you, Rav, agree with me that a girl who is less than 3 years old can't have sex and therefore doesn't have a chuppah? And so, right, this is like distinguishing between, and this kind of gets at one of the other sources we looked at, the idea of like the difference between someone who's puzzle, i.e., like you're not allowed to be in a relationship with them or have sex with them, versus the like can't have sex with them. It seems like the like tinoket, like the pachotim about shalosh is almost being compared to like closer to like nida potentially than like the
yeah, I think because she's eventually going to
right, because
up.
like she will be not 3, like the nida will be sorry, she will
Right,
be
the
not
nida
less,
will be
she'll be
right.
not less than 3. The nida will be
Exactly.
Torah at some point, as opposed to the psulot who are like permanently puzzle. And Shmuel's like, okay, even if you think there's a chuppah for all those other psulo, you have to agree there's not a chuppah for a less than 3-year-old girl. Amar Rava af'ala nami t'nina bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad mitkadeshet b'ya v'im ba leha yavam kana v'chayavin alea mishum eshet ish u'metamet bo'ala l'tamet mishkav tachton ke'elyon yiset l'kohen ochel b'truma ba le'achad mechol psulim pasla. So Rava just brings a baraita that supports this distinction of the bat shalosh versus pachot me bat shalosh, which say that like once she turns 3, she can be mitkadeshet with sex, and she can be acquired in yivum with sex, and like all the different, basically like all the different things can be effective for her once she turns 3, implying that these things wouldn't be effective when she's less than 3.
Right. So that seems to kind of push against the original claim that like the child under 3 is like it doesn't have chuppah, because like actually it seems like you can still do all these other things, right? So it's sort of
no, but I think this is supporting that, right? Because it's this is bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad.
Yeah, sorry, no, I got myself okay. Been a long day. Got myself confused. Yeah, you're right.
Isn't this Gemara making a mistake that I myself make, which is bringing a proof from Kiddushin to Chuppah? Maybe.
Well, but
maybe they're different.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lexi.
like he also says the like Nisa the Kohen Ochelet Betruma, right? Or the like, but like it's not exclusively Kiddushin. The Mitkadesh B'Biyah is one of the things that's mentioned, but that's not all that's being brought here.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, maybe we should do the second half because that kind of brings that chiluk in a certain way. Keep going.
Amar Rami Bar Chama, Yesh chupa l'psulot, banu l'machloket, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Bar Chama says this idea of like whether chupa is effective for those who can't have sex with one another. We've arrived at this dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Meir Amar Kiddushin pasle, chupa nami pasla. Okay, and I when it says Kiddushin pasle, is it like the Kiddushin are pasul as in like the Kiddushin with psulim are also pasul as in they aren't effective?
That was how I was reading it.
I assume this was lechuna, right? Is the Kiddushin?
Oh yeah. No, you're right.
Okay.
Joel's right.
Then like if with one of the psulot, Rabbi Meir says if you do Kiddushin with one of the psulot, then it makes you pasul for the kahuna. And so also he would think chuppah with any of these psulot. So like he would say like yesh chuppah lepsulot, as in that like chuppah affects something significant with psulot. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's amre kiddushin lo paslei, chuppah nami lo paslei. So for Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who say that like kiddushin with the psulot don't make her pasul for the kahuna. Chuppah also they wouldn't think is effective and doesn't pasul her for the kahuna. Umimai, like from where do you get that would be like that they would extend that to chuppah? Dilma adkan lo kamar or in either case, Dilma adkan lo kamar Rabbi Meir hatam ela bekiddushin dekanela aval chuppah de lo kanela lo. Maybe Rabbi Meir specifically said that the kiddushin, which has to do with this idea of like kinyan, of like acquiring whatever, that when they've like acquired her, that makes her pasul l'kuna. But chuppah, which is not the same kind of framework of kinyan exactly, maybe he wouldn't say chuppah is effective.
So that's, I want to jump in. I was wrong, actually, according to Rashi. Rashi says that salam sali is that makes her pasul from. Well, it's kind of the same thing. It makes her pasul from eating the truma if she's a bat kohen from her beit aviha. And so therefore it is effective. It's the same
it ends up being right. But either way, it ends up, just to clarify, right? Either way, it ends up being that like whatever procedure does affect something.
It like significantly did something. It accomplished something.
Exactly.
Right. So we don't have to say that like they would each apply their deen for kiddushin to that of chuppah. Like maybe Rabbi Meir thinks that kiddushin, which is about kinyan, is different than with chuppah. So maybe he would say chuppah isn't effective. Inami adkan lo ka'amri Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon hatam ela bekiddushin de lo krive lebia aval chuppah de krive lebia hachinami de pasla. Alternately, we could say that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon said that like kiddushin doesn't pasul her because like it's not, if you're not kiddushin bibia, if it's kiddushin with other kind of thing, is like, since the main ikar of this is that these are like psulo people who it's like usher to have sex with, kiddushin, which is like, if not kiddushin bibia, one step further removed from sex, maybe that didn't accomplish anything, but maybe chuppah, which is like a much closer step to sex with these people you're forbidden to have sex with, maybe they would say that does affect something and would make her pasul.
Great. So I think the main thing I want to get out of this is this, like the suggested logic of, or language of chuppah de kriva lebia, right? That like there's something, chuppah is both kind of deeply connected to bia and also not it itself. And that's going to lead you to certain kinds of conclusions about whether it works for someone who you are prohibited from having sex. Okay. Questions, thoughts about that before we proceed? Just unmute yourselves if I'm missing you. Okay.
I have a technical question about what's going on in the WA, but it sounds like that's not the point. So I think we can move on.
Okay, you can like put it in the chat or something and maybe people answer. I think, okay. So the other relevant Gemara that's in the background here, and it certainly is more relevant, is this Gemara in Ketubot that Joel mentioned briefly. So maybe I'll make him read it since I didn't put it on the source sheet until pretty.
All right, I can. Tana kavate de Rav Chisda. All right, so this is there's a bright like Rav Chisda, his opinion that was earlier. Harei shehaya pito afuyav utvachot tavuach beino mazug natan mayim al gabei basar. This Rav Chisda has to do with how far the wedding has to be prepared for you to not call it off if the father of the groom or the mother of the bride died. Just to give the background here. Umet aviv shel chatan or ima shel kala machdisin et hamet lecheder v'techatan v'tekala lechupa uvol bilat mitzvah uforesh benoheg shivat benoheg shivat yamei mishteh v'achar kach noheg shivat yamei avelut. All right, so before so if the wedding is completely prepared at this point, you've already poured the water on the meat, and the father of the groom or the mother of the bride dies, right? Then you put the dead body in a separate room. You bring the chatan and kala to the chuppah. They have sex that night, the beit lat mitzvah, and then they separate from each other. And they have 7 days of Sheva Brachot, what we call Sheva Brachot nowadays, 7 days of Mishtet, 7 days of feasting, right? And afterwards, then they have 7 days of Avelut because, right, a parent just died. And V'chol Tana Yamin during the Avelut, all those, not just the Avelut, even the Mishteh, all those days, Hu Yashen Ben Hanashim, he sleeps separately with, his friends, and V'ishto Yashena Ben Hanashim, and she's separated with her friends. And then it says V'chein Misha Persa Ishto Nida, Hu Yashen Ben Hanashim, V'hi Yashena Ben Hanashim. And the Gemara says also, if a person's wife it becomes Nida, then they have to sleep separately, right? They sleep with their friends instead of sleeping with each other in the same room, essentially, right? This is back to the Avelut thing, right? That for the 30 days of Avelut, she still can adorn herself because she's a new bride, all right? And then it says, Darash Rav Yosef Brei Derava, Mishmei Derava, right? The Lo Shanu Ela Shelo Baal, right? The whole thing about Nida is only if they hadn't had sex before. Aval Baal, Ishto Yeshena Imo, right? But if they've already had sex, then they can sleep in the same room, right? Obviously separate beds, but in the same room. But wait a second, in the case of the not the nida, for the case of the chuppah where a parent had died, they had initial sex and yet they still have to sleep separately. So what's going on here? Vekatani hu yashem ben ashim behi yashena ben ashim, and nonetheless we said they had to sleep separately. Hikamar aprisaish donida. No, that statement of Rav Yosef in the name of Rava was only about when she's nida, right? That they have to sleep. Not that they have to separately, but that only in the case of nida is it where if they haven't had sex before, they then have to sleep in separate places or completely if they haven't had sex. But if in the case where they have had sex, but they were just married and we're in this avelut state, then even though they've had sex, they still have to sleep separately. We're still nervous that they're going to have sex if they're in yichud together. So hopefully I explained that okay for people to.
Yeah. Did anyone have questions about that before we comment a little bit? Great. So this is going to be the source for the tour saying, sort of codifying that, like, this is what we do, that they sleep separately. Joel, were you going to say something else? It sounded like maybe.
No, this is where we get our discussion that the urge for people who, as we were talking about before, who haven't had who have had sex and know that it's an Iser Karet, right, they're going to be able to keep them refrain, when they're in Yichud together. But in a case where they have, but it's Avelut, and this is what the Gemara gets asked about this, even though it's not an Iser Karet, nonetheless, we're afraid that they are going to be overcome by their urges. And
precisely because it's not a
because it is, yeah, sorry, yeah, exactly, because
precisely
it is,
because it's just a minhag. All of Avelut is really just a minhag,
yeah,
except for the first day, according to the Ramban. So therefore, they'll treat it lightly, and they may come to have relations when they shouldn't. So therefore, we make them sleep with the men and with the women.
I remember something from what I learned of Hilchot Avelut from you, Rav Nachum, 5 years ago. So it's just a little bit.
Was it that long ago?
It was a long time ago.
Great. Okay, this Rambam should be very familiar, so we don't need to see it. And the Mishnah, I think, also spells out things that Yavni already talked about. So I think we'll skip to the Beit Shmuel. Someone want to read?
Sorry, could I just make one comment on the previous Gemara?
Yeah.
Just sort of incidentally to these being two of the important Gemaras operating in the background, I think these are also like important typologies of the broader set of concerns operating in the background, where in the second Gemara we have a Gemara that is fairly invested and related to sort of the realia of life, and actually is fairly emotionally attuned to these various mental states of Avelut, of Iser Karet, of how the Baal and the Kala are going to be relating to each other, and comes up as like fairly pleasant. And then this other Gemara is fairly detached from most realia, and is sort of like in a purely theoretical framework where it then is entering into a whole set of discussions about fairly disturbing material, but in a purely formal context. And so that these are the two typologies operating in the background of something concerned with realia that is actually emotionally competent, and then a purely formal context that sort of obliquely gets into this incredibly disturbing discussion.
I think that's, on the one level, I think that's right. On the other level, I think, like, I'm not sure this Gemara in Ketubot is so friendly, so to speak.
It might just be by contrast that it's friendly.
Right. I mean, okay, right. Like the standard, the bar is low in a certain way, but I guess, like, I don't know, this image of like moving the body to the other room and being like, okay, just like put that aside for a minute, and now you're gonna like do this other thing and get that done, and then like go back to your morning practice. Like maybe that feels emotionally astute, and maybe it doesn't, right? I mean, it's a horrible situation, obviously, but I think it's certainly interested in people's psychological states, but I think it's interested in them more in the way like Rav Landis was talking about, where like we kind of make like various sort of chazakas about what we're gonna think, where we think people are gonna be, rather than actually investigating where they are. I don't know. It like
a teacher that I have said that when he was studying for his Avelut Bechina, he went to a wedding with his wife, and he just like stood there pointing at different people and telling her to quiz him on if one of them died, what the procedures would be for the different relatives passed away at that time.
Okay.
But you will all, assuming you finish your bechinas, be faced like with situations like this, and you'll be faced with situations, and ein mamtinim, which we pointed out earlier, or I tried to point out earlier, which gives way, or in a sense, excuse me, ein mamtinim, which becomes very strong in terms of how the community has reacted to the ability not to have a chupat nida. Then you have situations which everything cries out, is that how can you have a wedding? How can you have a wedding? And you'll have in front of your face, you'll have siblings of the chassan or kala screaming at you and saying, how can you have a wedding? And you'll have a distraught kala, and you have a confused chassan, or the opposite. And sometimes there's a clear message. We continue, and I'm going to say something now which I never say, even though I've been a rabbi for many years. I've never said that, but here it goes. We choose life. Let all the other non-Orthodox or whatever say those statements, which is fine. I never say that statement. But sometimes we choose life. That's it. Maybe they're right. We choose life. And this is a clear halacha. You can do whatever you want with the parsing out the stuff. But it's a clear halacha. We choose life. That's it. And the dead person, the avel, there'll be plenty of time. And it'll be a terrible availus. By the way, in general, any delay of availus is also terrible. And when, it's worked out because of Chag or something that you have 7-8 days with no Avelis, no Siyam. It's awful. It stinks. You know why? Because death stinks. Literally stinks. And actually life is a good thing. But don't quote me that I said life is a good thing unless you need it for a tshuva like that. And there's no compromise on this. That's how we pass it. Well, in this situation, maybe no. This is what we do. We do the chuppah. Jews have done it for thousands of years, and I've had that. I mean, personally, on several occasions, I've had that, not with family per se, but with Chassan and Kala calling me the day after I buried one of their closest friends, and I was going to do the funeral for the other closest friend. Friday, I buried their friend in one part of North America, and on Sunday, I was going to do the chuppah for them, and I was scheduled to do on Monday the funeral for the other closest friend, and they wanted to stop the wedding, and they had all the reasons for stopping the wedding. And I said to myself, you know what? What am I living in? I'm living in medieval times. Am I going to give a medieval psak? Damn right, I gave a medieval psak. They know what life and death was. They had that all the time. You think it's not happening right now? We sit in our Zoom areas right now. Those tshuvas, the individual rabbis have to be giving. You'll be giving it too. So no heter on this one. Okay, if they have to ring in your ear at any given time, just know, don't have to look up the sources. There's no heter. Ein mamtinin, we go ahead. Thank you for allowing me to be a rabbi.
Thank you. I mean, I think to Aaron's point, like there is a kind of formalism in that strong psak that is maybe more like the Gemara in Yevamot than it is like the kind of portrayal of the way you're talking about Ketubot, that like it's a sort of emotional thing. Okay, in the interest of time, I think since we've had a whole discussion about the like hormonal manipulation question, I think we might as well read that. Obviously, I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but I think this is sort of important to think about because I think it's become like a really common practice and it's worth discussing. So yeah, this is an article from Shakira from like 2006. And basically what she does in the article is at the beginning, she explains like the medicine behind it and then gives kind of her opinion through some combination of like medical and halachic sources. So can I get someone to read this? It's easy, it's in English. Go ahead, somebody.
Sure. Medical advances of the past few years offer the ability to use hormonal medication to prevent chupat nida. There are times when such intervention is clearly needed, such as when the pre-selected wedding date falls at a time when the bride is likely to be a nida, or when the wedding must take place during a specific time, such as school vacation. Many brides, however, have begun to believe that all women use such interventions. This is based on a prevalent belief that stress can lead to changes in the cycle, and therefore hormones should be used just in case. This is a problematic situation, as interventions may at times not be needed, and the decision to intervene hormonally needs careful balancing of risks and benefits.
Okay, so that's sort of the opening paragraph of like setting up why she's talking about this, and then in the last paragraph she gives like her kind of reading of the situation.
Right. She's coming with sounds like a very strong assumption that chupat nida shouldn't happen.
Yes. She seems to come, which is surprising given like the way she treats the sources and what we've seen. She seems to start from the position that chupat nida shouldn't happen. But basically she comes to that conclusion not on the basis of like the Rambam says so, but rather on the basis that she thinks it's sort of like sociologically not good.
Mm-hmm.
So the halachic analysis that she gives is pretty similar to what we covers most of the things we just saw.
All right. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
It is this author's opinion that setting the wedding date based on the natural cycle without the need for medical intervention should be encouraged as much as possible. A woman with a menstrual cycle that can vary as much as a week may need hormonal manipulation to prevent chupat nida. In this case, the intervention should be started at least 3 months in advance to allow the body to adjust to the hormones before being given and for changes in formulation if needed. If a woman consults the physician after her wedding date has been set, and it turns out that the date will most likely be a chupat nida, or if there are reasons the wedding needs to be rescheduled for a more inappropriate time,
I think she means appropriate.
she should, yeah, that makes sense. She should be offered hormonal interventions to prevent chupat nida unless clearly contraindicated. If it is close to the wedding or only a mild delay is needed, progestin is probably the safer choice. If a woman is already taking a hormonal contraceptive for any medical indication or halachically approved contraception, the cycle can be manipulated using that medication.
Right. So her view seems to be, on the one hand, that the halachic sources don't need you to like avoid this, but that it is best avoided. And again, I think this kind of goes to some of the gray area stuff we've been talking about throughout, that like, in the end, we're going to try to avoid needing the hormonal intervention, but when it's necessary, it's necessary, and this is what we're going to do. She seems quite worried, I think, about the notion that like everybody thinks that people sort of think that this is what everybody does.
I think it sounds like from the quote you brought, it seems like she's only arguing really against people who do it as a default, because maybe you'll get nervous and you'll start to have your menstruation. But no, that's what she's against. But she'd rather you choose the right date, and if you can't, then use hormone. She's not really against hormonal. She's against using it as a default.
Yeah, I mean, she's not against it totally by any means. But I think she is against a kind of cultural assumption where like this is just what you do.
I had a question on this, practical question of like how far in advance people in her community are planning their weddings, and how far in it, like how definitely people know their cycles.
Right, exactly. If
advance.
If it's 6 months ahead of time and it's off by 2 days, 2 days over 6 months can turn into a lot of days.
Yeah, right. So it seems like I think that she's imagining, shorter, right? 6, if you vary by 2-3 days and you plan 8 months, 6-8 months in advance, then like all of a sudden that's a week, right? Yeah, I think that she is writing for a community where engagements are a lot shorter. Which
in very observant communities, I don't know how to say that, but in Israel, Haredi communities, Chardal communities, and communities that are Dati, Leumi, but Yeshivati, try to get the wedding in within 3 months. In communities, you know it yourselves, in communities in New York and Los Angeles, as examples, where getting the wedding hall is so hard, and everyone feels an obligation for when, not just, brother Jim will probably be taking his law, his whatever finals that he has to take for whatever law school or whatever is taking. So it's almost a year, so that's like, that I think is, by the way, I think this is written quite well, and I think it's good. I think it's good. I think the pressure she's talking about does nonetheless exist, and I'm moda to that. In practical halacha, I think Reb Nachum, what you say is absolutely correct, except that people do go crazy before weddings. There is a lot of anxiety usually, and so in a certain sense, she's taken away from the anxiety. Let's be normal about this. Let's be natural about this. I think it's well written. Who's the writer?
Dina Zimmerman.
I don't know her.
Okay. I don't know. She writes about, she's a doctor by training. And whatever, she writes about these kinds of issues. Okay. I think that is our time. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah and
Yeah.
Yavni. Really interesting.
Yasher koichem.
Next week we'll.
Also, I'm a little sorry for my outbursts. I'm not only righteous, but I'm on medication. So excuse that. I don't know. I feel pretty good.
Are you planning to get
about
married
being
soon?
on medication? A permanent mode. I hope not. Cheryl's starting to hide the bottles. So okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we'll have Joel and Siman. Joel, tell us about next week.
Lamed Chet, we're gonna do we're going back to Kiddushin for the week. Kiddushin al Tanai, and so which I think is a topic that gets brought up a lot, and of course, right. Rav Eliezer Berkovitz, that's Sol, right? He wrote a whole book about it once upon a time. So which I'm not an expert in, but he actually wrote it as a suggestion of ways to avoid some of these issues around Aguna, was to essentially do all Kiddushin al Tanai. So we'll look into that and what kind of Tanai you need to make. How does the Tanai look? What does it work? Does it not work? You know, and what can kind of cancel the Tanai out. And so if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, it's an enormous Siman, right? Because he gets into all these particular examples of like, if you made this tonight, does it count and so forth. But so we're only looking at like really the beginning of it and maybe some parts. But hopefully it'll be instructive. So, and hopefully sources by tomorrow morning, my time. So, but
okay, thank you.
Cool too.